Hey, thank you very much, Larry. Thank you to you and to Technology's Future for inviting me here. I appreciate that. And I hope that I can follow in footsteps of Mike and Jeff and deliver a good program for you. Just let me see if I can share my screen. What I'm going to be talking about today is what I'm calling the Broadband Battle Royale, which is cable HSD versus fiber to the home or fiber to the premise. There's been a lot of action on both fronts in the last year, both on the cable side and on the fiber side, as well as other competitive technologies for broadband, such as wireless, satellite broadband. I'm going to try to cover everything here. There'll be a couple of slides that you may recognize from Jeff's presentation last year, but I'll try to give you a lot of fresh stuff. So what I thought we'd start off first is talking about COVID-19's impact on U.S. broadband. As we know, it's been a very heavy impact on this. This data comes from the NCTA, the National Cable TV Association. You can see here both upstream and downstream traffic has surged since the pandemic started, particularly the upstream traffic. These figures go up through July of last year, but I'm sure that if I updated them, got them through December, the curves would still be pretty much the same. Upstream traffic has gone up something like a 40 to 50% since the pandemic started in March 2019. Well, downstream traffic is gone up something like 20 to 30%. These are both unprecedented surges in traffic, something that cable operators and other broadband providers did not foresee happening until the pandemic happened, and their projections were that these kind of numbers would come maybe 5 or 10 years down the line. So that's right away as they did. So this came as quite a bit of shock to the broadband industry. This slide emphasizes one of our vendors, all who studies this, shows how much upstream traffic especially surged. These are 2020 numbers, but if we had 2021 numbers, it would be the same. As you can see, once again, upstream traffic surged about twice as much as downstream traffic has, really congested broadband networks. So what are the biggest broadband drivers? This is a slide that you probably saw last year, Jeff. Certainly streaming services, a huge driver of broadband, teleconferencing, video conferencing like we're doing right now, online gaming, people working from home, people schooling from home. Coming on are things like AR and VR, though not as much yet, but will be in the future. So lots of things that are driving broadband, and particularly on the upstream side, conferencing and online gaming. So impact on broadband services. You can see these curves at the graph on the left, sort of like a hockey stick kind of growth, sort of like the graphs that we're seeing for COVID cases right now, unfortunately. You can see that conferencing is by far the biggest increase here, but other contributing factors as well are healthcare and education and other things here, but certainly video conferencing, family video conferencing has been big. Okay, so with that brief overview of what's been happening in the broadband market over the last couple of years, do a status report. Where does the U.S. broadband market stand? Last year was a record year for cable broadband. You can see from the numbers here, cable operators gained nearly 5 million broadband subscribers in 2020, by Charter, 2 million subscribers, over 2,200,000. Comcast, almost 2 million. Across the board, all the major cable operators had record or record years, about almost twice as much growth as they would normally have. But things have slowed down this year. Or I'm sorry, things slowed down last year. We don't have the numbers, of course, for 2022 yet. Early, we don't have fourth quarter numbers yet for 2021. But as you can see, these third quarter numbers for 2021 definitely slower quarterly growth, and in some cases, such as Mediacom, Maltese, you can see the numbers are actually negative. They actually lost net subscribers. So the big pandemic surge for cable operators in terms of gaining subscribers seems to be over, and they seem to be going back to normal pre-pandemic times, or in some cases worse than that. So the big surge is over. It'll be interesting to see what happens when the pandemic is fully over, and whether things return to where they were before, or whether we see a new phase. At the same time, cable broadband growth slowed down. We're seeing fiber to the premise, fiber to the home, really taking off. You can see here in this graph from sister company in Colombia, FTTH has passed DSL as the second biggest platform in the US. Nowhere near where cable hybrid fiber coax is, but as you can see, HFC is sort of market share wise going down a little bit, first time in time, while fiber is clearly on the upswing. And this kind of pattern keeps up. It's fiber could overtake or match HFC. That won't happen for a while, but certainly the trend is pointing in that direction right now. Here's some examples of what some North American service providers deploy fiber. I won't do everything here, but as you can see, AT&T and Verizon, as two leading phone companies in the US, have been racing to deploy fiber, particularly AT&T, which has a very ambitious target of deploying fiber throughout their regions. But also we have a major cable operator, Altice USA, which is in the process of laying fiber at passing homes here, and just upgraded plans because of their broadband subscriber numbers not too good. So they're planning to pretty much change all of their HFC to fiber. Up here in Canada, Bell Canada has a very aggressive plan to install fiber at as many places as possible. And then we have one other company, Technology, in the States, used to be CenturyLink, which has pretty aggressive plans as well. And if we went, we could keep going down the list. Mid-sized phone companies, smaller phone companies, and mid-sized cable operators, smaller cable operators. Everybody has aggressive fiber plans right now, and probably will get even more aggressive with the infrastructure bill, which just passed by Congress and signed by the president. It's going to allocate $66 billion for broadband deployments throughout the US over the next 5 to 10 years. Fiber networks surging in the US, as you can see here. This graph from the Fiber Broadband Association shows that there are now almost 51 million homes passed in the US by fiber, and that actually was as of 2019. So the number is probably higher now, probably well over. It was 50.6, and it's probably up to close to 60 now. So fiber is clearly surging in the US. And then the next slide shows that it's even more so here up here in Canada, where about 2.8 million homes are covered, and about 8.3 million homes are being marketed to. And then once again, those last numbers are probably even higher this year. It'll be interesting to see how much higher they are. It's a similar broadband subsidy program in Canada right now. So fiber is clearly on the rise. So that's a huge factor how the broadband market is going to shape up over the next few years. Related to fiber is the growth of the signal of the protocol that's used to bring signals over fiber, which is PON, passive optical networking. And what we're seeing is the growth of Nextgen PON, which instead of 1 gig PON that we've had before, we're seeing 10 gig PON and beyond. Speed, symmetrical speed of 10 gigabits per second, 10 gigabits per second in direction. So these are slides that came from one of my Omdia colleagues, Judy Kunstler, who's a principal analyst at Omdia, and she has different shipment numbers and projections for PON equipment. These are for optical line terminals, which are one of the basic pieces of equipment for PON. And as you can see here, the blue part is for non-nets for existing versions of PON, while the purple part is for Nextgen PON. As you can see, there's strong growth throughout 2020 for OLT port. And you also the Nextgen PON, which is 10 gigabit PON, 10 gigabit PON. It's called NG PON 2, which is also 10 gigabit speeds. all those kinds of things are growing. In the third quarter of 2020, Nextgen accounted for about 30% of all shipments, compared to 19%. Just over 2 quarters, Nextgen shipment doubled. This is Julie's forecast for what is going to happen with Nextgen PON in North America over the next 5 years. And as you can see, the purple part is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's 10G PON beyond. So we're going to see a lot faster speed equipment over fiber. So once again, fiber is racing out in front of cable in terms of the speeds that it can deliver to the home business. This graph shows, I'm just moving stuff off my screen. This graph shows the global forecast from Julie for shipments over the next 5 years from the middle of the decade. And once again, as you can see, the darker blue, purple are for Nextgen. You can see once again, she sees shipments of Nextgen PON equipment way up over the course of the beginning of the next 5 years. So once again, you see a lot faster PON equipment throughout the world, and this means contributes to great growth of fiber. So given all that.
So we were talking about the movement to Nextgen PON has been driving vendor revenues. As you can see, the purple is shipment revenues for Nextgen PON equipment, while the light blue is shipment for non-Nextgen, which is 1 gigabit and below, while the purple is for 10 gigabit PON equipment and above. So once again, the forecast is that there'll be more and more 10 gig equipment out there, once again helping fiber move along. So, okay, so then I want to give a quick overview of the emerging next-gen wireless and satellite broadband players. I believe that Jeff Baumgartner ran through this a little bit last time, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. But we have a couple of things. We have 5G, which the major phone companies, Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile, all rolling out now very aggressively. And this 5G will enable, or is enabling, in-home broadband service that could compete against cable and compete against fiber, particularly in rural and other underserved and unserved areas of the country. We have fixed wireless access that's emerging that some of the phone companies are rolling out, as well as some of the cable companies, such as Cable One, which is also known as Sparklight, and Charter. They're both rolling out fixed wireless, once again, in areas where it doesn't make sense to build fiber or to build HFC. So once again, in rural areas or areas that are adjacent to urban areas, but not quite rural, sort of half suburban and half rural. So it's a combination of using the fixed wire to get to a certain point and then using wireless to go the rest of the way to reach the consumer. The newest player is satellite broadband. We've had a couple of major satellite players that have emerged over the last year that are populating the skies with lots of satellites, and that are either in medium orbit or geostationary orbit or in low orbit around the Earth. And then once again, they may be competitors to cable and to fiber, particularly in rural and underserved areas. Once again, it'll be interesting to see whether they can compete in suburban areas and more densely populated urban areas, but certainly they could be a competitive force in the less populated parts of the country. Okay, so given all that, given everything that fiber is doing, given everything that wireless is doing, given everything that the satellite broadband industry is doing, how is cable responding? How is cable trying to compete against them? Well, here's a slide that lays out some of the cable's major options that they're employing right now. For one thing, cable operators are looking to boost the existing capacity of their current HFC networks in any way possible. One of the ways they're doing that is pulling fiber deeper in their own networks and splitting more optical nodes, which allows them to serve fewer homes with the same amount of fiber. It allows, so in other words, they can have greater capacity and greater speeds for more homes. Another thing they're doing is they're increasing the spectrum amount that they have, the RF spectrum that they have, through something called mid-splits and high splits. Basically, the way cable systems work now, most of the spectrum, most of their capacity is used for downstream. Mid-splits and high splits allow them to use more of their spectrum for upstream, which is where the great growth is happening right now. Another thing cable operators are doing is that they're preparing their plan for upgrading to the next DOCSIS standard, which we're going to get into in the next few slides. Currently, DOCSIS is the basic signaling standard that cable operators use to send broadband signals over their pipes. Right now we're up to DOCSIS 3.1, which is deployed around the country, and what cable operators will soon be upgrading to in a lot of cases is DOCSIS 4.0, which I'll talk about in the next few slides. Another thing cable operators are doing is they're pursuing their own fiber builds, their own fiber to the home builds in what they call greenfield areas, which are areas that they don't reach yet, and adjacent edge out areas, which are areas that are next to the areas that they already serve. They're also looking to employ different kinds of next-gen technologies, such as artificial intelligence, network automation, machine learning. All these things help them increase their network efficiency. And finally, they're looking to leverage benefits of other kinds of next-gen technologies, which include distributed access architecture, which involves moving some of the head-end functions and some of the equipment from the basic cable head end where the signal starts and pushing everything out into the network. They're making their networks more intelligent and less dependent on what's happening at the central data center. They're also virtualizing their networks. They're moving some of the basic equipment and functions from the physical lines up into the cloud and into software. And they're looking at things like edge computing and other kinds of cutting edge kind of technologies right now. This is a slide that's based on a survey that we do every year of cable operators, along with an industry organization called SCT, where we ask cable operators, what are the kinds of upgrades are they planning over the next few years? This case was over the next 5 years. As you can see here, lots of different upgrades are happening, or at least being planned. All the different versions of DOCSIS 3.1, which is the current version that's out there, full duplex DOCSIS, which is a part of DOCSIS 4.0, which we'll get into in about a minute. There's also extended spectrum DOCSIS, which is another part of DOCSIS 4.0. Deploy fiber deep, which just means putting more and more fiber into their network. DAA, which is the distributed access architecture that I just talked about, deploying fiber all to the way to the home, which you can see came out as the leading choice here, and a few other things such as deploying fixed wireless technology and also deploying PON themselves over the fiber lines that they're building. This is a chart that we've done showing how much cable operators in the U.S. have deployed DOCSIS 3.1, which is the current standard of DOCSIS that's out there. I won't go through all the details of this chart, because you can see most of the major and mid-sized and even some of the smaller cable operators have pretty much rolled out DOCSIS 3.1 to all their regions, to just about all their homes. What the current version of DOCSIS 3.1 does is it allows cable operators to offer speeds of up to slightly more than 1 gigabit per second downstream on the broadband, and up to about 100 or 200 megabits per second upstream. So not a lot of upstream capacity, actually even less than 100 megabits, I should say. Not a lot of upstream capacity, but a lot of downstream capacity. So that's allowing them to stay competitive now with fiber providers who can offer 1 gigabit per second in both directions. But it won't allow them to stay competitive much longer. This is a similar chart showing what European cable operators have done with DOCSIS 3.1. They're a little bit behind their North American counterparts. They got a later start. But as you can see, they're starting to catch up. The two biggest operators in Europe, which are Liberty Global and Vodafone, have both been rolling out DOCSIS 3.1 throughout their regions as well. So Northern and Northwestern Europe is pretty well deployed for DOCSIS 3.1. But as I said, DOCSIS 3.1 is maybe fine for now, but increasingly it's not so fine, and it won't be fine in the future. So this slide, which comes from Vodafone Germany, talks about the evolution of DOCSIS and shows we're up to like the 6th generation of DOCSIS now. We started with DOCSIS 1.0, and then we went to DOCSIS 2.0. Actually, we went to 1.1, we went to 2.0, we went to 3.0, we went to 3.1, and now we're about to go to DOCSIS 4.0. As you can see, each of them is a huge leap in capacity and speeds over the previous standard. And DOCSIS 4.0 is going to be a much bigger jump over DOCSIS 3.1, as we'll get into in this next slide. So what is DOCSIS 4.0? This is something that Cable Labs, which is the standards organization for the cable industry, came out with last year. Actually, now it's 2 years, almost 2 years ago in 2020. It supports multi-gigabit speeds and support for symmetrical services. With DOCSIS 4.0, cable operators, if they have their plant upgraded properly, will be able to offer 10 gigabits per second downstream and up to 6 gigabits per second upstream to subscribers. DOCSIS 4.0 also supports low latency applications, which are as important for things like online gaming and telemedicine. It supports enhanced security. Now, the one key thing to know about DOCSIS 4.0 is that there are two separate complementary paths to get there. One is full duplex DOCSIS, which allows traffic, upstream and downstream traffic, to travel over the same band of spectrum. And then there's extended spectrum DOCSIS, which keeps downstream and upstream traffic separate, but it extends the amount of spectrum that cable operators have so they can dedicate more spectrum to the upstream if they want to. Like I said, the specifications were released by Cable Labs almost 2 years ago now, March 2020. The first prototype products has just started emerging at the end of last year, but we should see a lot more coming out this year, as well as testing of products to follow. We're starting to get field tests and lab trials of different parts of DOCSIS 4.0 technology, which I'll get into in the next couple slides. And there's also work on extending the spectrum even beyond the current limits. And there's even talk of a new standard beyond DOCSIS 4.0. Maybe it'll be DOCSIS 5.0 once 4.0 is tired, but that's going to be probably in another 5 to 10 years. And this all ties into the industry's broader multi-access 10G initiative, which I'll get into in a minute. Okay, so the 10G initiative is a concept that was introduced at the Consumer Electronics Show 3 years ago in Las Vegas. It was basically done to counter the launch of 5G wireless. It's sort of confusing because the 5G in wireless stands for 5th generation, while the 10G in cable stands for 10 gigabits. So the G's are not the same, but cable came up with this sort of to muddy the waters a little bit about 5G. 10G is access agnostic. I always trouble with that word. So that it involves not just delivering service over a hybrid fiber coax, but also over fiber to the premise, as well as wireless. So the idea is that it doesn't matter what platforms cable operators will use to deliver 10G service. It targets symmetrical speeds of 10 gigabits per second, so both upstream and downstream, which would be new for cable operators. They've never had symmetrical networks before. They've always been faster on the downstream because they've always had a lot more spectrum on the downstream. And it would support enhanced security and lower latency. Now, we've seen a lot of action on this front from some of the major cable operators that have been conducting trials and demonstrations over the last couple of years. In particular, we're seeing a lot of action from Comcast, which is, of course, is the biggest cable operator in North America. They've been testing symmetrical services as fast as 4 gigabits per second in various lab trials. With the latest one just last month, where they tested actually using DOCSIS 4.0 cable modems for the first time. Charter, which is the second biggest operator in North America, has also started doing some DOCSIS 4.0 lab trials. They've tested speeds as high as 8.5 gigabits per second downstream and 6 gigabits per second upstream. In Europe, we've seen things being done by Vodafone Germany and Liberty Global, Vodafone, and Liberty Global are the two biggest cable operators in Europe, and they're also on the forefront of DOCSIS 4.0 activity. This is a nice chart that comes from Cable Labs that shows how DOCSIS sort of fits in, what the DOCSIS network will look like using distributed access. Remember, distributed access is where we're moving some of the functions and the electronics from the central cable head end and putting it into the network. So the idea here is that as you move some of the network smarts and put it in the network, it allows you to have greater capacity and allows you to support higher speeds to the cable modem, which is at CM end of the charts here, as well as to the home, the cable modem being in the home. So distributed access and DOCSIS go hand in hand in terms of expanding the capacity of cable networks to offer higher speeds and greater capacity to the customers. This is a chart, graph from one of the leading consulting firms that we deal with, and they have do projections every year. This one is about their projections for distributed access architecture. As you can see, they expect DAA to really have started taking off last year, and particularly take off in 2022 and through the middle of this decade. And this is a key thing to know because distributed access architecture took a while to take off. It's a complicated, complex, expensive technology to install, and cable operators took a while to get started on it. But fueled by the pandemic and the need to increase the spectrum and the need to increase their speeds and the need to make their networks more efficient, DAA is now starting to take off in cable networks. These are projections from our sister group here at Light Reading, Omdia, which talks about all the next-gen kinds of equipment. Once again, the purple is the key color to look at. The purple shows how different kinds of next-gen equipment and technologies, lots of acronyms here, lots of initials. I won't go through what they all mean, but it's basically saying that DAA and other next-gen technologies that support higher speeds and higher capacity and greater cable spectrum will all be on the rise through at least the middle of the decade, and probably once they start projecting through 2030, we'll see that as well. Okay, I sort of raced through that because I knew I was taking that we lost some time there. So I'm happy to go back and look at some other slides if you want one, take questions. But that's pretty much my presentation right there. As you can, to sum up, it's that cable operators and fiber are both in a race. They're both in a race to try to see which one will be the dominant broadband technology platform in the US, in Canada, and throughout North America and throughout the world. Cable has had the upper hand for the last 10, 20 years, but now fiber is making a big push to take cable's place. And what will be interesting to see is whether cable can keep increasing its speeds and keep increasing its capacity to stay ahead of fiber, or whether cable operators at some point will just sort of give up the ghost and say, okay, you know, fiber is a superior technology. We're just going to go all fiber too. And to heck with the coaxial cables that we used to have. We're going to dig them all up and go all fiber. So it's going to be an interesting match to watch over the next 15 years, 10 or 15 years, which is a good thing, and it helps keep people like me employed. So we like that. So thank you, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you a lot, Alan. If anybody has any questions, unmute yourself and ask them. In the meantime, Alan, would you take the opportunity to say just a few more words about light reading and how people can get involved and take advantage of the opportunities you all offer?
Oh, sure. Light Reading is the biggest online service that covers the cable, telecom, and broader space business. We're a daily website. It's at lightreading.com. We feature about 12 or 13 stories a day on the telecom and cable and related businesses. We also put on a lot of webinars on different related subjects. We run conferences on these subjects, and we do research reports as well. So if you go to our site, it's a very busy site. You'll see a lot of different things there. But we like to think that we're the #1 source for telecom business news in the world.
Thanks. If anybody has any questions for Alan, please unmute yourself and ask them or put them in the chat. In the meantime, Jeff Binkley, if you're out there, could you unmute yourself and say hi?
I am out here. I believe I'm unmuted, and hi, everyone.
Hi. Jeff is our moderator for this session. I didn't introduce him before because he wasn't on when we started, but he came on shortly after that and has been here for the presentation. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you.
Jeff Binkley is with Ryan, and as I mentioned at the start, Ryan's one of our sponsors. So Jeff, thank you very, very much. I was wondering if you were okay with handling some Q&A for Alan, and whether you had anything you wanted to say yourself. So we made Jeff a host so he can share if he wants to.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I don't know what the best way to, if the question's better just to actually ask or put in a group chat, but I'll tell you what I will do. I'm going to start with one here. Looking at the growth and potential growth of fiber, fiber all the way out to the premises. That's at a substantial cost, and
right.
There have been some iterations of fiber all the way to the premises that have struggled to recoup that cost, yet there are efficiencies around that over legacy systems. We look at all this and just wonder what comments about why this is being done and what those advantages and efficiencies are over and above just obviously you offer more bandwidth and it's the potential for more services and enhanced revenue streams, but along the way there have to be there's some play on the other side of that, right, on the cost side, and just wonder if you could address that.
Okay, so you're asking what are the advantages of going to fiber rather than going to HFC?
Well, on the cost side versus legacy network on efficiencies, I mean, we know obviously the band. I mean, you're doing it because you can provide additional bandwidth, right?
Right.
That's always been the case. Yet, again, is there more to it than that? Because there's an installation cost, there's operating costs. All of those have to be considered. And from your perspective on that side, what's the rationale?
Sure, Larry, was there something you wanted to put in there too?
Oh, I was going to say you may want to stop slide sharing so we have a better view, unless you think you're going to refer back to a slide, which it might be easier not to. But
okay, I can stop slide sharing if you think that would work better. Okay, hold on.
I think it'll probably be a little more easier to have a discussion.
Plus, you'll get to see everybody's face, so it's nice for everybody to be seen when they're asking questions and talking.
Sure. Okay, how's that?
Much better.
Okay. So the question was, what are the advantages of using fiber besides the fact that it can provide better service? Good question. It's true that installation costs for fiber have been higher before, but they've actually come down to the point where fiber is no more expensive to install than installing coaxial cable. So the cost advantages are the cost disadvantage of installing fiber has gone down. At the same time, fiber, once it's installed, has lower operating costs and has lower downtime. It's a more efficient delivery platform than coaxial cable. It has fewer technical problems. It requires fewer amplifiers and other kinds of equipment to move the signal along. So it has lower operating costs, it's more efficient, and it's not any more expensive to install than cable is anymore. So all the metrics are now pointing in fiber's favor. Did that answer the question?
That answers the question perfectly. And given this, there's going to be a substantial amount, and you can see it on your graphs, of
Right.
Coax cable still out there, right? And,
right.
And does this create a situation where there's going to be this legacy underutilized investment, much as maybe you've seen with not to the degree, not exactly the same thing, but you've seen on the telco side with ultimately with old copper wire. And is this not potentially somewhat analogous situation that you're just going to have this because it's not replaced, it's out there physically for a long period of time, but as far as utilization or the degree of utilization is part of those graphs you've shown, and an implication of those, that there's just going to be this substantial and growing base of, while utilized to some extent, relatively less contribution from, and again, I just use the term, underutilized legacy plant.
It's a good question, and I'd say yes. I'd say that is definitely a problem that could happen for the cable industry, is that they'll end up with a lot of old cabling that is not really being utilized very effectively, just like the phone companies have ended up with a lot of old copper wire that's not being utilized effectively. Cable operators are trying to push out that period when that will happen by putting more and more fiber in their existing plant to make it more and more efficient. But at some point, they will reach the time when they will have to give up their old cable networks and just go all fiber. So they will get to that point. They're basically trying to push that point out as far in the future as they can right now.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Other questions?
I had one. You mentioned pushing functionality out of the hub into the network.
Right.
Can you say a few more words about that? I'm trying to imagine what that means in terms of physical units of equipment.
Well, the cable head ends, which are the central processing places, are very heavy with compute equipment right now. And what the cable operators are trying to do is take some of the functions that heavy duty equipment operates and move those functions into the network, so that A, the head ends are not nearly as crowded and as power dependent as they are now, and B, it allows them to be more flexible if they can put more intelligence in the network, and also get rid of the need for a lot of physical equipment by having some of the functions being supported by software and by cloud-based services, rather than having it supported by actual hardware in the system. So basically, they're trying to clean out their head ends and put more and more functions and more intelligence in their networks, and be more reliant on the cloud and less reliant on big physical heavy-duty appliances.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Sure. It's what all service providers are doing right now. I mean, the cable's nothing special in this. In fact, cable operators kind of got a late start on this. Some of the phone companies were actually doing this earlier, probably because their equipment is even older, and even more in need of replacement than the cable operators' equipment. I mean, the AT&Ts and Verizons probably have some equipment that goes back a century at this point. Any other questions?
Hey, Alan, this is Steve with T-Mobile. Quick question for you. I mean, this is
Hi, Steve.
good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is the cable-focused, presentation. And with those new entrants you talked about, I mean, T-Mobile is trying to get into that business. Can you talk about the different competitive threats and how you see that on the economics of the business?
Sure. Well, T-Mobile is probably one of the biggest competitive threats because T-Mobile has been so aggressive in both rolling out 5G and in getting into fixed wireless. So I'd say the competitive threat from the wireless players and the players such as T-Mobile is mainly in the rural areas and the suburban areas adjacent to the rural areas, which are not being well served, but in large part by cable operators now, and are not wired well for cable. So there's probably millions and millions of households that are not being properly served, that fixed wireless and pure wireless can serve with broadband speeds that are high enough that it will keep people happy. So I think that's where the real battleground will be, especially with the infrastructure bill allowing all sorts of players to build a lot more fiber and to do a lot more wireless services in areas where it wasn't economic to do it before. So I think there's going to be a lot of competition going on outside the big cities between the new players, the phone players, and the cable players trying to keep their broadband edge. So I think T-Mobile is going to be a big part of that.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Alan.
Sure. I wasn't just trying to tell you what you wanted to hear, though.
No. I hear you on that aspect of it. I just worried about even in the wireless space, and maybe you can help as a follow-up question address some of that. When we see hyper competition, do you see hyper competition coming to the broadband space, and for lack of better terms, making it ruinous? It's good for the consumer, but not good for the business, so to speak.
It could happen that way. It could happen that way because broadband competition is definitely going to heat up with everybody rolling out fiber, and there's only so many parts of the country, so many parts of the continent that are underserved or that are unserved. So yeah, we're going to see more competition. I mean, we just did a story on Light Reading the other day about how the city of Alexandria, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C., just put out a request for proposal for new broadband providers, and they got 4 applications for it, 4 serious applications. So they may end up with like 3 or 4 companies overbuilding Comcast in the Northern Virginia, Washington suburbs. So, which is not economically supportable. I mean, I don't know if even 2 players are economically supportable, nonetheless 4 or 5. So yeah, we're going to see some hyper competition, and we're going to see some players with probably overly ambitious business plans that end up going out of business because they really can't make it against 2 or 3 other players in the same market. That always seems to happen when new markets open up, right? We get a lot of competition, we get a lot of players, too many players that can be financially supported, and then the market ends up consolidating. We end up with just 1 or 2 major players. So yeah, I expect to see a new wave of that happening.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Sure. Anybody else?
Go ahead, somebody. Alan, I had a quick question. You mentioned 10G initiative. Could you say a few more words about what some of the applications for 10G might be, or what applications 10G would enable?
That's a good question because it's not clear yet because most of these still have to be invented. But some of the things would be virtual reality, bring virtual reality really to life, as well as I always forget what AR stands for. It's not altered reality. It's
augmented.
Excuse me?
Augmented reality.
Oh, thank you, augmented reality. So 10G will definitely make those much more reality. It'll certainly improve online gaming. Some of the new things that we may see are something like holograms, holographic video. We may see full field video. So we'll see some really advanced video applications. We might see 8K video. I mean, we just getting into 4K video now. We may get into 8K video. We'll get into 360-degree full screen video. So a lot of probably video applications, really advanced video applications. So it'll be kind of like a Star Trek world that way. 10G will certainly enable things like telemedicine, being able to see your doctor from home and being able to do all sorts of examinations from home. Some real advanced video applications seem to be the first things that are on tap for that.
Thank you.
Sure. I had a question for the group, if I could ask that.
Sure.
How many folks have cable right now, and how many folks have switched over to fiber to their homes or their businesses, their offices?
I think you have to put that as a poll. How many
Okay.
Have switched from cable to fiber? Is that the question?
Yeah.
I have an interesting answer to that. I switched to fiber for a while, and then I moved, and now I'm back to cable. So,
why is that, Larry?
My old house was in East Austin, where I had actually 4 different alternatives for 3 alternatives for fiber, and then an alternative for 300 megabits with the cable.
Mm-hmm.
And and 2 of them were clients, so I went with the fastest, which was AT&T fiber.
Right.
I sold that house and moved to a condo in South Austin, where I don't have the AT&T fiber choice, but I have a Google fiber. But but Comcast gave me a much better deal, or excuse me, it was the Spectrum here, sorry, for 300, and that was fine. So I went back to cable. So I have the alternative, but for my particular applications, I was happy with 300. But I suspect within a couple of years, I will be wanting that gig.
Okay. And have you been satisfied with Spectrum's service so far?
So far.
Okay. Okay. Good to know. Yeah, I was curious about whether you might have tried Google Fiber too, since that was one of their first. Austin was one of their first cities.
Yeah, they fell down on the customer service side. They assumed because I was moving into a condo that they would have to do a credit check on me and spend 2 days before giving me service. And I laughed at them. So
yeah, I'm sure you didn't appreciate that. Yeah.
Sometimes non-technical things, make a difference.
Right. I understand. Well, it's going to be interesting to see if people move back and forth like you did between cable and fiber. I suspect we're going to see a lot of movement back and forth, and customer service is going to play a much bigger role than it has in the past. Once all the providers can provide 1 gig and higher speeds won't be the determining factor anymore. It'll be how well they're actually taking care of their customers.
No, indeed. Let's look at the chat real quick. Ian says that everyone thinks that Google Fiber built out all of Austin, but far from the truth. I barely know anyone who can get it. Power of marketing over deployment.
Yeah, that's for sure. In fact, Google Fiber has pretty much given up on actually laying fiber to people's homes. In their new cities that they're going into now, they're relying on wireless rather than fiber. So it was a lot of talk, but not a lot of action in the end.
Yeah, to Ian's point, the real target in Austin was if you were aerial cable as opposed to buried, you had a lot better chance of getting Google Fiber. That's where they targeted the easy marks.
Right.
But again, the differentiator for me was something that was non-technical at all. And then back on the chat, Jim Dabrowski, who is from Verizon, says 100% Fios here, where available fiber to the home is vastly superior to any option offered by the cable industry or local alternatives, both in speed, security, and performance.
Spoken like a true Verizon man.
Yeah.
And a true fiber guy.
Yeah, well, it's true. I mean, fiber versus HFC is definitely a superior product. There's no doubt about it, and you can definitely get higher symmetrical speeds. I don't think even cable operators would challenge that now. They're just trying to make their service be good enough so that people won't switch.
Yeah. In everybody's defense across the industry, though, both cable and telco and new players, there seems to be very much of concerted effort to continue to improve speeds in broadband and service, which I think is a credit to both industries and the industry in general. For that's worth. We're coming right at about 15 minutes after the hour, and we want to start the next session on time. And I think everybody probably wants a break. So if anybody has any last minute questions, or Jeff, you have any final remarks, probably ought to head that direction.
Any questions? No final remarks here. Thank you so much. And break time.
Thank you, Alan.
Did you see the poll, Alan? There's a poll.
I do. I see the cable's slightly ahead of fiber there. Okay, well, thank you for participating in the poll. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry we ran into some technical problems here, but I'm glad we were able to work them out.
I'm glad too, and thank you so much for Alan for an excellent talk, and we very much appreciate you being with us. Feel free to attend as much of the conference as you like. We welcome that, and a good day to you.
Okay, thanks very much.